Hello, and thank you for joining us this evening at Morocco World News. I'm Madeleine Handaji. Today, we are thrilled to be able to welcome outgoing British Ambassador to Morocco, Thomas Reilly. After a successful 3-year posting in Rabat, Ambassador Reilly is moving on to a new adventure, but has made a significant and lasting mark on Morocco-UK relations during his tenure in Rabat. Ambassador Reilly played a key role in negotiations for the Morocco-UK Association Agreement, which will preserve existing Rabat-London trade agreements and partnerships after Britain's exit from the European Union. The agreement, according to representatives from both Britain and Morocco, is a key step in strengthening future cooperation and collaboration between Morocco and the UK as London shifts its lens from Eurocentric to global. Trade value between the UK and Morocco currently stands at £2.5 billion and has the potential to steadily increase as the two countries look towards future cooperation projects. Over 750,000 British tourists travel to Morocco every year, and the ambassador and his team have implemented efforts to increase this number through promoting Moroccan cultural heritage. Ambassador Reilly is also a keen advocate of universal education and has, during his 3 years in Morocco, promoted projects to encourage participation of girls in post-primary level education, particularly in rural areas. Of course, this short summary does not cover a fraction of the achievements, dedication, or progress the British Embassy has undertaken in Morocco over the past 3 years, but we all want to hear from Mr. Reilly himself. We will have questions at the end, time for questions at the end from viewers. If you do have a question, write it in the comments below and we will do our best to answer as many as we can. So, good evening, Ambassador. Thank you for coming to talk to us this evening. So in June, the Moroccan government formally approved the post-Brexit partnership agreement between Morocco and the UK. What does that actually mean for the relationship between the two countries going forward?
So first of all, Madeleine, thank you very much for having me on with you this evening. It's a huge pleasure to be with Morocco World News. It's a really good news channel, and I'm delighted to be here with you. So I think let's set this in the context of the UK leaving the EU. And since essentially 1970s, all the UK's trade relationships have been done through the EU because it's been the EU that's negotiated the trade agreements. So the trade that the UK was doing with Morocco, and currently is doing with Morocco, was all done through the EU-Morocco Association Agreement. And given that volume of trade that you've mentioned, and interestingly, it's gone up by about £700 million in the last 5 years. So it's quite a dynamic trading relationship. It was really important that we had in place an agreement in the eventuality of either a no deal at the end of last year or a failure to reach some sort of agreement during the process of negotiation between the EU and the UK, and certainly something in place for the point at which the UK finally leaves the EU at the end of this year. So the agreement that's in place is a continuity agreement that assures the continuity of trade between the UK and Morocco. But within it, it envisages a much broader and deeper, wider relationship, both in trade and political relationships. So it is not just a trading relationship that we envisage through the association agreement, but a much broader political agreement. And it is really important. I'll just give you some statistics. I love these. All right, I'll ask you, what percentage of tomatoes that are eaten in the UK come from Morocco?
I've got no idea.
25%.
25%?
Yeah. And how about soft fruit? What's the percentage of soft fruit?
Well, I buy Moroccan blueberries in my local supermarket, so I think probably quite a lot.
20%.
20%.
Yeah. And then for olive oil, it's 11%, and olives, it's 19%. It may be the other way around, actually. And then sardines is 60% of all the sardines eaten in Morocco, in the UK, come from Morocco. So just in soft fruit and veg, the relationship is really important. But if you broaden it out and you look at trade in services, you look at oil and gas, you look at automobile parts, you look at aerospace, you look at renewables, you look at financial services, there's a huge potential in this relationship. And it's that really the potential that the association agreement is looking at.
That's really exciting. So going back to agriculture and the soft fruit, things like tomatoes, things like that, will they be subject to the same hygiene standards and health standards as we have currently with the European Union?
Absolutely. So the idea of Brexit is that the UK is able to renegotiate different trade agreements with different parts of the world without lowering the high consumer protection and environmental protection standards. And that's really important, so that the Morocco UK trade and the Morocco EU trade won't be subject to two different regimes.
So we're still talking about sardines, fisheries and agriculture. So will the post-Brexit agreements also include Western Sahara as the EU agreements do?
So the treatment of Western Sahara in the association agreement between the UK and Morocco is exactly the same as the treatment of Western Sahara in the EU agreements. And that is a position that was taken because of European Court of Justice decisions, but also High Court decisions in the UK.
Thank you. So moving on to the next question, how has rapid shift towards a more Pan-African vision for economy and politics changed the UK's strategic view of Morocco?
So this is a really good question, actually, Madeleine, and it goes right to the heart of why the association agreement was so important. The association agreement that we signed between the UK and Morocco was the 17th to be signed around the world, and it was the first to be ratified. So the relationship between the UK and Morocco is very privileged in terms of it being literally, if we were to leave the European Union tomorrow, it is the only agreement that is already in ratification here in Morocco and in the UK and could go into entrée en vigueur straight away tomorrow. And one of the reasons it's so important is the vision of His Majesty the King, which is a Pan-African vision. So positioning Morocco as a gateway to Africa, and a gateway to Africa in many areas where we have a lot to work in common on. So whether that's agriculture, and I'll come back to productivity in agriculture in a minute, or renewable energy, or banking and services, or improved yields through phosphates. All of these are areas where we believe that we have a lot to offer Morocco, and Morocco has an enormous amount to offer the African continent. You know, you're a world leader on renewable energy. You're a world leader on soil-based, soil-specific fertilizers through OCP. Through Marshika and the work that is being done on purification of water and reclaiming of wasteland, that's really important for slum areas in less developed countries across Africa. And of course, the development of Casablanca as a finance city and as a finance center, and using Casablanca Finance City as a launch pad for services and business services into Africa works extremely well with the City of London, which, as you know, is a world leader in finance. If I could just come back for a second to agriculture. The Moroccan agricultural sector is a vital sector for the GDP of Morocco, but also for employment in Morocco. So 41% of employed of the workforce works in agriculture, but it only produces between 13 to 17% of the GDP. So it's very resource intensive, but not hugely productive. Now, you don't want it to become massively productive and push all those people into unemployment, but you could increase the productivity yields. You could get greater investment from foreign companies here in Morocco. And there are some supermarkets in the UK that are really interested in investing in that productivity yield increase. This year, the UK was supposed to be the guest of honor at Morocco's International Agricultural Fair in Meknes. Unfortunately, it got affected by COVID. I very much hope that we will be the guest of honor next year. But we would have brought lots of companies over to look at that agri-tech, how you increase agricultural yields. And that's really, really important when you put it in the context of Africa, where there is a growing population, a youth population, but at the moment, not enough agriculture to feed the population of Africa.
Thank you. Thank you for the feedback. Sorry. I'm going to move on to the next question about visas. So in 2019, there was an all-parliamentary group report that showed in the UK that applicants for visas from Africa, including North Africa, are twice as likely as Asians, Middle Eastern applicants or Americans to be refused a visa. Do you think that the UK policy on visit visas will change with Brexit, or do you think that the visa application climate will become more difficult?
So, I mean, I think this is a really good question. It's a really difficult question. It is certainly the issue that I've had most problems with here in Morocco since I arrived. Visas are very, very sensitive. You have to go back to the reason for having visas. You have a visa to protect your national security, whether that is from someone who is likely to overstay or to create a problem in your country, or for someone who may abuse your own visa system. So the UK system is set out to restrict the number of people coming into the UK to the people who are actually going to bring benefit to the UK, whether that's tourists or businessmen or students or scholars, etc., etc. And the UK is just in the process of bringing out a new points-based system, which will make it fairer for people to get into the UK. It will level out the access to the UK. It will remove the privileged access that was given to European Union member state citizens, and it will level that out right across the world. It's based on the Australian system, and it will give you points according to your skills, your skill set, your potential to contribute to the British economy. But look, let's go back to the question about students, because student visas are really important. They are a vital source of revenue for our universities. But more than that, they're a vital way of other countries benefiting from the UK's excellent tertiary education sector. So as you know, I'm a great supporter of education. I would like to see many more students from Morocco going to the UK to study there and to benefit from, obviously the very best universities like the LSE, which I studied at, and then the not so good ones like Oxford and Cambridge, which people have heard about, but perhaps not at the same standard as the LSE. I'm joking. But I think, the more we can encourage Moroccan and other African nations to see the UK as a destination for their students, and the more we can encourage those students to come and work in the UK after they've done their university education, the better that will be for bilateral relations and also for the economy of the source countries.
Thank you. That's interesting. So, on travel, obviously COVID-19 has affected massively people's ability to travel. So London took a very different approach from Rabat in terms of stemming the pandemic and didn't close international borders. So do you think this will affect the resumption of travel and tourism between Morocco and the UK in the short term or the long term?
Well, I think in the short term, at the moment, as you know, Morocco's borders are closed to tourists. And although there has been some relaxation recently to allow Moroccans resident overseas and foreign nationals who are normally resident in the UK to come back to Morocco, for normal tourists and for businessmen, the borders remain closed. So yes, COVID definitely will have a short-term impact on tourism. And in the medium term as well, I think until there is a reliable vaccine which is widespread and easily available, and or a cure or an effective treatment for COVID, I think in the medium term, tourism all around the world will be affected. But look, in the long term, Morocco's got so much to offer. I mean, there's a wonderful expression, to be like a boy in a sweet shop. No reason it can't be a girl in a sweet shop. The expression is a boy in a sweet shop. And that suggests the inability to make a decision about which one to have first when you're faced with such a bounty of choice. And if you think about Morocco, you've got 350 kilometers, 500 kilometers, I beg your pardon, of Mediterranean coast, 3,000 kilometers of Atlantic coast. You've got mountains, you've got deserts, you've got jungles, you've got amazing towns like Chefchaouen or Fez, Meknes, Tangier, and of course Marrakesh, or Agadir and Essaouira, and I know you have a soft spot for Essaouira. So in the long term, I don't think that tourism in Morocco is going to be affected by COVID. And in fact, I'd go even one step further. If you want to go on an exotic holiday and you are based in Europe or the UK, and you don't want to get on an aeroplane, and you want to drive so that you can control where you're going to stay on the way down, you can control your own environment, practically the only place you can go and have that exoticism is here in Morocco. So Morocco is fantastically placed to regain that tourism market, and you've got everything going for you. And the really great thing is you've got all of that geography, all of that history, all of that culture, plus you've got some fantastic cuisine. And I have to say, I know everyone says this, and it's a bit of a cliche, but you are such a hospitable country. You know, Morocco just welcomes people in with their open arms, and you just feel welcome. And you can't replace that. You can't beat that. And so short term, medium term, yeah, COVID will have an impact. But long term, there's a great future in the tourism industry here in Morocco.
What about export and import?
Exports and imports. So, I mean, I think the UK Morocco bilateral trade, as I say, is about 2.5 billion. I think that will increase after Brexit, and I don't see any real reason why it should decrease because of coronavirus. Now, of course, tourism is part of that bilateral trade equation, so there will be an effect which is related to tourism. But in terms of trade in services, trade in automobile parts, trade in oil and gas, trade in fibers and cables, trade in textile, trade in agriculture, I don't see any reason that COVID would create a downside. The one fear I have, and this is increasingly prevalent both in political discourse here in Morocco, but also around the world, is that COVID is being used increasingly as an argument for economic sovereignty, which I call protectionism. And we all know that protectionism doesn't work. We know from all economic theory that it doesn't work. We know that it gives a short-term boost to your economy, but long-term it encourages anti-competitive and unproductive practices. So if you want to boost your productivity and you want to make sure that your industry is specializing in an area where it can make a real difference and really be world leader, don't go down the protectionist road. And that is my one fear about the UK-Morocco trading relationship, that there may be an impetus towards protectionism. I would advise strongly not to listen to those siren voices.
Thank you. While we're on the subject of COVID-19 travel, could you clear up, there have been lots of reports today, including in Morocco World News, about restrictions on tourists who have overstayed their visas in Morocco during a lockdown and when they need to leave the country.
So I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is if you have a residence permit and a visa or a visa here, and that has expired, you can go to the police station and you can renew it. And the Moroccan authorities have been very relaxed about people overstaying their visas. They are not imposing charges or fines or extraditing people or deporting people because of overstay on visas. They recognize that during the lockdown, it's been really hard to get out and go and renew your visas. So the people that I've spoken to, and please don't take this as an absolute source of truth, but the people to whom I've spoken have told me very clearly, people can renew their visas, they can renew their residence permits. There is no deadline by which they need to get out of the country. But my strong advice would be, if your visa or your residence permit has expired, go tomorrow, go Monday, go as soon as you possibly can to the local police station and renew it. And then you don't have a problem because you have a valid permit for remaining in the country. So that would be my advice. And if I find out anything more, I will put it on my Twitter account. You can follow me on my Twitter account.
I will. So moving on to the environment. So on the Queen's birthday, you said that the climate change and the environment is something that is a key priority for Morocco and the UK. Could you give us some examples about how that will take place and what that will look like?
So, look, I mean, climate change is a threat which is coming towards us all, and it's probably going to impact on Africa more than most countries, unless you're a small island state in the middle of the Pacific, where climate change is already having a terrible effect. And a country like Morocco, which is already water stressed, is going to be even more stressed by climate change. But look, Morocco's taken incredible strides. You go back to 2013, The World Bank report in 2013 said that Morocco was dependent for its energy, for 97% of its energy on imported hydrocarbons. Thanks to the efforts of Mazen and Izen and the vision of His Majesty, Morocco is now at 34% self-generated renewables. It will be at 40% by the end of this year and over 50% by the end of 2030. That makes Morocco a really good news story. And it makes Morocco not just a good news story for what it's doing, but for the fact that Mazen is now looking at how you export that know-how, that technical brilliance, around Africa to help other countries in Africa. The UK, for its part, has got huge funds tied up in green investment funds, which are looking for places to invest. So there's a perfect partnership there. And especially now as we look beyond Brexit to the UK looking for non-traditional partners, especially in Africa, renewable energy is a really, really important part of that story. But added to that, next year the UK is hosting COP26. Now, Morocco hosted COP22 here just before I arrived, I think in November 2016. So Morocco has a great good news story to tell about the success of COP22, but also how to host a really big international event like that. So on both the kind of the technical side, i.e. What Mazen is doing, how you roll out technology, how you make it sector specific, how you make it country specific, and then how you get the financing from the UK into Morocco, into renewable energy. And also on the political side, which is COP26, this is another example of a marriage made in heaven, or the potential for marriage made in heaven, between the UK and Morocco. Quite apart from that, every single person in the country, in the world, in fact, should be worried by climate change. It's going to affect all of us. We watched a film 2 weeks ago called The Plastic Ocean, and I was really upset, disgusted, moved, revolted by the film. Not that the film was a horrible film, but because it just showed what we have done to the oceans. And plastic really only entered our supply stream in the 1950s. So this is in 60, 70 years, we've created pandemonium. And we have a responsibility to undo that harm. So I think it is a personal calling for me. It's a calling for the embassy. It's a calling for the British government. And it's a calling for the Moroccan government to work together in a true partnership to really address this terrible and really frightening challenge which is coming down the line towards us.
So, there are a number of British gas companies operating in Morocco. How does that fit in with the environmental vision?
So let me start by giving you some background. I used to work for Shell, and Shell is an oil and gas company. And while I was there, its portfolio tipped from being an primarily oil company to being primarily a gas company. Now, I gave you the figures on Morocco and the incredible progress that has been made. But even by the end of 2030, Morocco will only be producing about 52% of its electricity needs from renewable sources. The rest of it will have to be made up from other sources. Now, I would like to see a world that is decarbonized, zero carbon. I'd like to see it tomorrow. But we have to be realistic that there is going to be a transition period. And it is much, much better that that transition period is based on gas burning power stations, which are 50% cleaner than coal-fired power stations. When you look at coal, it is a terribly polluting substance. And one of the reasons why we're in such a mess now is since the Industrial Revolution, up until right now, we have been burning coal as our primary source of power. So you need to take coal off the grid. But if you take coal off the grid tomorrow, half the country, 2/3 of the country ends up in electricity poverty, in energy poverty. So it is much, much better to be continuing to produce gas and moving all your energy producing requirements, which are not met by renewable energy, over to gas than it is to be doing that from coal. And in that sense, what the British oil and gas companies are doing here in Morocco is filling that transition period, is working out how Morocco can be self-sufficient, more self-sufficient in oil and gas, so that it can burn the gas here domestically, which it produces domestically, so it is insulated from international fluctuations on the international market of gas price. But this has got to be a short transitional period, which will enable us to get to a decarbonized zero carbon future by 2050. Otherwise, it's too late. So I just give you some things that we've done in the embassy. So we have put solar panels on the roof of the embassy. So the embassy is now the first British embassy in the world to be wholly solar powered. And because of COVID, we haven't used any electricity off the grid for the last 5 months. It has all come from our solar panels. They were halfway putting solar panels on the roof of the residence when COVID struck. We went to lockdown, so they couldn't finish the work here. We recycle at the residence, and recycling is really important. We use water fountains rather than plastic bottles. And here in the residence, we don't have any more plastic. The only exception, I'm afraid, is sparkling water. And I admit that I am very fond of sparkling water, and I haven't been able to find sparkling water in glass bottles. If I had, there wouldn't be any plastic bottles at all in the residence. Recycling. Now, I got into terrible trouble shortly after arriving here when I went for a walk with my wife and our dogs to the barrage just outside Rabat. And we got there and it was beautiful. Hills tumbling down to this beautiful lake in the middle. And I thought, my God, this is paradise. I'm going to bring the dogs here, every day, more or less, to walk. And we got out of the car and we walked 200 meters and we were up to our ankles in muck, stuff that had been thrown away over the weekend by people who'd camped there, who couldn't be able to take their rubbish away with them, plastic bottles, plastic bags, paper cups. It was horrible. And I sent a tweet. I got into a lot of trouble for it, but it's because I think there is such natural beauty here in Morocco that it seems a real shame to ruin it. And one of the areas that Morocco did incredibly well, it banned plastic bags in supermarkets. Bravo, that's fantastic. But there's a legacy here, and there's plastic here which needs to be recycled, and that is something that I think Morocco could grab the world and be a real leader in recycling.
Thank you. Oh, we're going to talking about Gibraltar, which so last month the UK and Spain entered talks about what will happen to Gibraltar after the UK leaves the European Union. What is the vision for Gibraltar? Because obviously Gibraltar is incredibly close to Morocco, and there's a lot of potential there for collaboration and cooperation economically.
So this is another area that I got into trouble for in another interview. So I should be careful what I say so I don't get into trouble again. So I'm going to take your question backwards. I think there's huge potential for trade between Morocco and Gibraltar. And linking to what I was just talking about renewable energy, I would love to see a renewable energy line, electrical cable, which is providing Gibraltar with its energy, and so that Gibraltar can benefit from Morocco's development in renewable energy. I think in terms of the financial sector, Gibraltar has a lot of financial sector experience and expertise, which I think it could usefully share with Morocco. We already do joint military exercises with the regiment based in Gibraltar. I'd like to see more of that. I would also like to see working with the Moroccan government, with the Gibraltar government, and with the Spanish government on things like smuggling, on drugs, on people smuggling. So I think there's scope for trilateral cooperation there. In terms of the future vision for Gibraltar, look, Gibraltar and Spain have a difficult or a historic relationship, but the government has always been clear that Gibraltar is an integral part of our negotiations with the EU, and we've committed to fully involve Gibraltar as we negotiate the next stage of the UK-EU relationship. There are obviously some circumstances which are totally specific to Gibraltar. It shares a land border with Spain. I think it's the only, that's not quite true, because of course Northern Ireland shares a land border with Ireland, but it's the only part of mainland continental Europe that shares a land border with the EU after we leave after the UK leaves it. And of course, we're seeking a deal that works for the whole of the UK, and that in that sense, the deal must also work for Gibraltar as well. So those talks have really nothing to do with the question of sovereignty. There have been a number of referenda in Gibraltar about the future of Gibraltar. Those referenda have always come out very clearly in favour of remaining part of the UK, and I don't see anything that is likely to affect that. So I hope that answers the question, and I hope I won't get into trouble for it this time.
It does. I'm going to get into a bit more. So the Gibraltar Spain-UK question is obviously unravelling at the same time as a lot of tension in northern Morocco with Ceuta and Melilla. So do you think that the parallels there, how do you think the parallels there might impact on things for either the Spanish enclaves in northern Morocco or for Gibraltar?
Well, in my more mischievous moments, the Spanish ambassador and I have exchanged views about this. Look, I think I'm not going to get into the relationship between Spain and Morocco with regards to Ceuta and Melilla. That's a question for Spain and Morocco to address. Equally, the discussion between the UK, Gibraltar, and Spain about the future of Gibraltar is not something that I think the Moroccan government wants to get involved with or should get involved with. And I think it's important that, you know, as diplomats, we have views, but it's important also that we stick to the area which is of immediate concern to us. And in my case, that is the Morocco-UK relationship, the Morocco-UK-Gibraltar relationship. And I would advise myself to stay out of the Morocco-Spanish relationship with regards to Ceuta and Melilla.
Thank you. We're going to move on to easier ground now. So, education. I know education is something that you are very passionate about, particularly girls' education and access to education. So could you talk to us a little bit about how you see the future of Morocco-UK collaboration in, you know, all sectors of education from early years right up to university level?
Yeah, so look, education is fundamental. You know, you can have the best functioning economy in the world, but if you don't have a supply stream of well-qualified, well-trained, well-educated people to enter the workforce, your economy is not going to make it. So my view on education is not specific to Morocco, actually. It is a view of education, the value of education, the importance of education, which is common around the world. In every country I've ever worked in, education has been a top priority. For me, education is not just about training people to join the workforce. There's a very utilitarian view of of education, which says you should only educate someone if it's going to help them get a job. I think that's wrong. I think education is a wonderful gift. It broadens the mind. It helps you develop your own personal potential. It enables you to start thinking around problems differently. And education for education's sake is a valuable and beneficial end in its own right. But in addition to that, proper education does create the next generation of people going into the workforce. And if you don't get it right, you don't have the economic diversification, you don't have the economic growth, you don't have the economic potential, and the country itself doesn't develop. So when I go to rural areas and I find schools which are, I don't know, 25 kilometers away from the village where the children have to come, and the parents say, well, actually, you know, we're not very keen about our daughter traveling 25 kilometers to school in the morning and 25 kilometers home from school in the afternoon. And because the schools there are too many pupils for the school, there are times when our daughter doesn't have a lesson, and therefore we don't know where they're going to be. Actually, we'd rather keep our daughter at home where she's going to be safe. And I look at that and I say, well, you know, I understand that. I have two daughters of my own. I want my daughters to be safe. But I also want my daughters to have an education. I want them to live up to their own potential. I want them to have the possibility of being all that they can be. And keeping them at home and safe with me is not going to give them that. So I am a passionate advocate for girls' education. You've got 50% of the population is female. And if you don't educate it, not only are you not releasing all that personal potential, but you're also limiting the economic potential of the country. If 50% of your 50% don't go to university, don't go to secondary school, don't have proper primary school education, you are limiting your economic potential. The maths is all there. So for me, getting girls into especially secondary education, enabling them then to have the potential of going to tertiary education is fundamental. And it's fundamental to the economic development, it's fundamental to the personal development, but it's also fundamental to changing attitudes about women's role in society. And that is something that I will always fight for, because women have every right to be treated equally as men. They have every right to be offered the same opportunities that men are given. They should not be constrained through a lack of education to stay at home, look after the house, have children, whatever it might be. And we have got to challenge the way in which women are seen in all societies around the world. The statistics are there about participation of women at senior level in all workforces. And the way you begin to challenge that is by demonstrating that girls can go to school, they can be successful at school, they can graduate from school, they can go to university, they can be successful at university, they can make a really useful and good contribution to society. And we've seen that in Education for All, this charity that I've been working with in Imli. When it set up 10 years ago, the parents were saying, "Over my dead body, will you take my daughter to your boarding school?" And now, 10 years later, it's educating 300 girls every year, giving 300 girls who would not have had the access to secondary school education. And the parents are there weeks before the beginning of term saying, "Please take my daughter." So we are changing attitudes. People are recognizing that girls have a right to education, and they are keen for it, and they are proud of their daughters. And that, for me, I get really emotional about this, because it is something I feel very, very strongly about. And I'm so proud of what Education for All has done. I'm so proud to be working with it. And when I see those girls and I see all that potential, it's wonderful.
Thank you. That sounds like a fantastic project, and I'm sure a lot of us will be researching it once we go offline. So could we move slightly to talk about UK-Morocco collaborations, and if there is anything in the works, or the future of possible collaborations between Morocco and the UK?
So I had a list earlier of agreements that we've signed, but we have obviously signed the association agreement. We've signed an education agreement. We've signed a status of forces agreement, which enables British troops to come and operate and do training with Moroccan troops here. We signed an extradition treaty. We signed a mutual legal assistance treaty. We have set up a UK-Morocco Higher Education Commission. We have set up a UK-Morocco strategic dialogue. So there's a great framework for cooperation between the UK and Morocco. When I came here, I just go back to education for 2 minutes. I was struck by the fact that I could send my child to a Belgian school, a French school, a Spanish school, an American school, a Moroccan school, but I had no option of sending them to a British school. So I wanted to have British schools here, and I was delighted just before I came on air with you this evening to receive confirmation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that the first 4 British schools have now been given authorization to set up here and are now established as British schools, which is great. Yesterday, we had the second meeting of the UK-Morocco Higher Education Commission, which is looking at how you bring in more British universities to Morocco. We have now got 2 British universities who have signed agreements with Morocco. I hope very much that this is the beginning, and I would love to come back to Morocco in 10 years and find 50 British universities here and 150 British schools here. Because I think the demand for British education, the demand for the English language training here in Morocco is high, and there is nothing fulfilling it at the moment. So in the education sector, there's an awful lot of work already going on. I think in the trade sector, before I came on air, I received news that UKEF, which is the UK Export Finance, so that enables British companies to come and invest in Morocco, and it effectively insures against risk of political collapse, economic instability, whatever else it might be, has increased the amount of money it's made available to British companies in Morocco. It was already £3 billion, which incidentally is 4 times the amount available to Egypt, and it has increased it further. So in the trade area, there's huge potential, and I would love to see the trade quadruple between the UK and Morocco. You mentioned tourism. So when I arrived, I think we were at 639,000 tourists a year. You gave the figure of 750. I think it's about 740,000, but it has gone up by 100,000 people in the 3 years I've been here. In the renewable sector, this is a sector where I think there's huge potential for growth. In the banking sector, real potential. And I think the most extraordinary thing about the association agreement that we signed, which is where we kind of began our conversation this evening, is that, as I said, it's not just a commercial agreement, it's a political agreement. And within that political agreement, there's scope for a whole series of subgroups of working groups, whether that's on political agreement, on security sector agreement, on cultural agreement, come back to culture, on education agreement, on military cooperation. And so that association agreement gives us a framework for a much deeper, much more ambitious bilateral relationship.
For a second, in terms of education, which I've got a question that sort of covers education, but also would impact the rest of the Morocco-UK relationship. So there is a big debate in Morocco about the language of teaching, and whether that should be French, whether that should be Arabic, and there are increasingly advocates for the language of teaching in Moroccan to be English. What do you think?
Well, it would be extraordinary if the British ambassador said they didn't think that was a good idea. So look, let me just take 2 steps back. There is no question, I think, that the language of international commerce is English, and that's not actually thanks to the UK, that's thanks to the US. There is no question that the international lingua franca is English, though there is possibly a question about whether it's Spanish and possibly whether it's Chinese, Cantonese. But for the moment, let's suppose it is English. In which case, for Morocco to integrate most effectively into the international market, it makes sense for Moroccans to speak English. But look, Moroccans have the most extraordinary facility for language. I have a friend down in the Medina here who is a surf instructor, and he speaks Korean, French, German, Italian, Spanish, English, practically you name it. Wow, where did you learn that? Did you university? And he said, no, I just picked it up listening to people in the Medina. Wow, that is extraordinary. His name's Anas, by the way. If anyone wants a good surf instructor, go and find Anas. He will teach you how to surf. Taught me how to surf. And if you can teach me how to surf, you can teach anyone how to surf. So I don't want to add to the polemic around which language should be taught here in Morocco. If you look at children at home, they will speak Amazigh or Darija. In the school, they will be taught classical Arabic. They might be taught in French. When they go to secondary school, they can then learn another language, and then they go to university and they learn in English. So it's not surprising there is a degree of confusion. If I had my way, I would say Morocco should reclaim Darija, you should reclaim Arabic, that should be your language of tuition. And the second language, in my view, should certainly be English, because it just gives you an entrance into the international market, the international world, into international trade, to the internet, and so on and so forth. But I'm certain that if I had the French ambassador sitting next to me, she would be saying it should be French. It's a really difficult area. I think English gives an entranceway into a whole world that maybe is more constrained if you learn French. But I was educated in France. I did my university degrees in France. I've sent my children to the French education system. I think the French education system is great. I think France is a wonderful country, and I love going there. And we just bought a house there. So that is absolutely not an anti-French statement. It is about what is best for Morocco.
Thank you. We're going to move on now to questions from viewers. So the first question I have is, this person has said, we need a UK role for implementing English as a main language in Morocco's educational system and exceed French. So I think you've already answered that one, but do you have any, Would you rebut that statement?
I mean, certainly, look, certainly I think that English, all right, so let me take the two parts of that question. First of all, English. I think I've made it very clear where I stand on English as a useful language. It is possibly the most useful language in the world at the moment. Spanish comes a very close second, as does Chinese, but I would certainly say that English is the language that you need to speak if you're going to integrate into the world market. In terms of access to the British education system, I don't think any country has got the perfect education system. But I think what the British education system does is, from the beginning, it gives you a whole way of thinking, an ability to challenge the status quo, to think for yourself, to find answers for yourself, to work out how you approach a problem, a solution, a question. And that is something that I think is really valuable then when you bring that out further into the economy. So just a very quick anecdote. When I went to France and I started doing my studies in France, the first essay we were set, the teacher or the professor asked the question. I didn't listen to the rest of what he said. I was already in my mind in the library thinking what books I was going to read, and I produced this magisterial 10-page, this, that, and the other with a bibliography at the end, and I gave it in, and it came back red. This was in the days before computers, so it was all handwritten. And I went to see him and I said, "What's wrong with it?" He said, "I told you to read these 2 books. I told you to read these 4 chapters. I told you it had to be thèse, antithèse, synthèse. I told you no more than 2.5 pages, and you've ignored my instructions completely." Okay, it's a really helpful way to set out your thinking, that it's clear. But when those French students came back to the UK, the tutor at the end of the first tutorial said, and I remember very clearly, "Your first essay is the death of copyright. I need it in 3 weeks." He walked out. And the French students went, "Ah!" because they hadn't been told what was necessary. And if you take those 2 approaches out into the economy, you have one which is driving entrepreneurial spirit and one which is less driven of the entrepreneurial spirit. And that's what Morocco needs for diversification of its economy. That's why I'm so keen to bring the British education system here to Morocco.
We've got a lot of questions about education. So I've got one here that I appear to have lost, sorry, from Daisy, who says, "Is ICT implementation in education one of the UK-Morocco near-future collaborations?" Thanks,
Daisy. It's a really good question. I think one of the things that COVID has shown us is that ICT and distance learning at distance. There you see, I can't find the rest of the right words in English, but I can find them in French. So maybe French is useful after all.
It happens to me all the time.
Distance learning, that's the word I was looking for. That's what COVID has shown us is not only possible, it's desirable, and it works. So my children have been doing distance learning in the French system for the last 4 months. So ICT is absolutely vital. The British Council has been really dynamic here, and I have to pay tribute to my colleague, Tony Reilly, the director of the British Council, for all the work he's done. So yeah, absolutely. It's something we're working on very closely with the Minister of Education, Minister Awicha and Minister Hamzazi. And it's something which I hope is going to be a fundamental part of our education relationship in the future.
Thank you. We've also got a question from Hamid, who says, "Is the Chevening Scholarship still ongoing for this year due to COVID-19?
Thanks, Hamid. So Chevening Scholarship, for those people who don't know, pays about £30,000 to students to go and study masters in the UK. When I arrived in Morocco, there were 6 scholarships here. We've now got 15 plus, I think it's 3 additional, which are paid for in part by private sector sponsorship. It's really, really important to help Moroccan students go and study in the UK. As far as I'm aware, Chevening scholarships are going ahead for this year, notwithstanding COVID-19. You will have to, if you're going, you will have to get your visa application in quickly. You will have to make sure that you have letters from the university. But I very much hope that COVID will not prevent students going to the UK and studying in wonderful universities like the LSE and less good universities like Oxford and Cambridge, and really enjoying themselves. And the really important thing here is, joking aside, it's not just about the studying, it's about learning about life in the UK, about being integrated into the UK, about learning about British culture. That's something we haven't yet touched on, but really finding out about the UK so we all feel much more comfortable Moroccans about the UK and people in the UK about Moroccans.
Another question from Amin, who says, oh, I've lost it. There we go. He says, why are Moroccan degrees not recognised in the UK?
Good question, Amin. Thank you very much for it. So I think this is due to what I would call a jahiliya, an ignorance. For mutual recognition of qualifications, that takes place through what's called the Bologna process. And the UK and Morocco, I'm not even sure Morocco is a signature to the Bologna process, so that might be a first place to start. But the primary problem, and it's a problem I come across the whole time here, is that people in the UK are ignorant about Morocco, and I'm afraid to say that people in Morocco are ignorant about the UK, which is why cultural exchange has been such a fundamental part of what I've tried to do over the last 3 years, to really try and break down that ignorance. I really hope that part of the work of the UK-Morocco Higher Education Commission, which, as I mentioned, met yesterday, will be to look at how you get to a point at which degrees can be mutually recognised. Because I don't think that degrees in the UK are recognised in Morocco either. So there's a mutual recognition issue there, and it's certainly something that the Higher Education Commission needs to look at. Thank you for the question. It's a really good one.
We've also got a question about the Edinburgh Award. So Brahim says the Gibraltar-Morocco Business Exchange are aiming to implement the Duke of Edinburgh scheme. Would that have the support of the British Embassy? Absolutely.
So for those people who don't know, the Duke of Edinburgh scheme is a scheme that was set up, I think, in the 1960s, but maybe the 1970s. And it encourages young people to be more adventurous, to get outdoors, to find out about the environment they live in, to learn about new places, new areas, to learn about everything from map reading to living in a community. So it's a really good scheme. And I think if the Gibraltar Morocco business community wants to bring that to Morocco, it would have the full-hearted support of, certainly if I was remaining in Morocco, it would have my full-hearted support, and I would imagine that my successor will do likewise.
Thank you. We've got lots of nice. This person says you're the most generous ambassador, and he was honoured to be invited to your residency.
Maybe I gave him a nice drink or a nice snack or something.
We also have questions about Royal Air Morocco. So you have tweeted on several occasions about Royal Air Morocco.
Yeah. So look, let me give you the anecdote that really annoyed me most about Royal Air Morocco. I was flying back to Morocco, and the flight was delayed. And it was delayed out of Gatwick by, I think, 2 hours. And there was no announcement, no attempt to explain why it was delayed, no apology, no attempt to engage with the customers. It meant that the flight arrived in Casablanca Airport at about 1 o'clock in the morning. When we got to Casablanca Airport, there was a strike by the baggage handlers. So again, people were delayed, people were tired, people were irritated. And a lot of those people, it was their very first visit to Morocco. It was the first experience of Morocco. Royal Air Morocco was the flag bearer for the introduction of those British people to Morocco. And let me just say, I've worked in 12 different countries, and I have, in all of those countries, I've tried to make the relationship between two countries closer. But Morocco is a country where I will leave a huge part of my heart, because there is so much potential here, and it is such a wonderful country. It really pains me when it doesn't live up to its own potential. And listening to those people, I won't use the language that they were using because it was pretty fruity. They were saying, this is a rotten country. I can't wait to leave. I will never come back. I will not recommend to any of my friends to come here. Why were they saying that? They were saying that because Royal Air Morocco had not been in touch with them, had not treated them like people, had not communicated with them, had not put anyone there to apologize, had not given any form of explanation to them. And so Royal Air Morocco was not doing what it should have done, which was really giving the best possible introduction to these foreign tourists to Morocco. And that's what annoys me. I don't mind, because I can come back to my house and I can send someone from the embassy tomorrow to pick up my bag. I don't mind. I live here. I know how great Morocco is. So it doesn't bother me. But it does bother me that the very first touch, the very first impression that a newly arrived person has on coming to Morocco is a bad one. And it's so easy to solve. You do an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we're really sorry about the late running of our aeroplane. This is due to a technical hitch. This is due to the late arrival of the incoming airplane. This is due to, the pilot fatigue. We are working really hard to get an aeroplane for you. I hope you'll bear with us. Please accept our apology. Oh, nice one. Very good. Someone arrives. You arrive at Casablanca Airport. There's someone from Royal Air Morocco. Ladies and gentlemen, we are really sorry about the delay to your baggage. There's a baggage handler strike. We are trying to get your baggage off the plane as soon and possibly quickly as we possibly can. We will do everything we can. Please bear with us. We are really sorry. Nice communication. I feel better. I feel they care about me. I feel they've paid attention to me as a customer. So that's my problem with Royal Air Morocco. It's the national carrier, and it should be the national flag bearer for the country.
Thank you.
Yes, I know I'm not a traditional ambassador, so I say what I think. I've always said I will be honest. When I see something I like and I approve of and I think is great, I have not hesitated to say it. When I've seen something I disagreed with or disliked or felt was letting the country down, I equally have not hesitated from saying it. Wins me some friends, wins me a lot of enemies.
I have another question, which I think should be able to help us talk about culture.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh, a question possibly about culture. So if you could recommend one thing to visitors to Morocco, what would it be?
So I think this is the question from Mary Thornby. Look, Morocco has got so much to offer. It is absolutely extraordinary what it's got to offer. And so my recommendation would be, come here, try it all. Go up into the hills, go off into the valleys, go and get lost, literally lost in Morocco. Go and try the tagine, try the local bread, try the, try all of these things, because you will be amazed by what Morocco has to offer. It is an extraordinary country.
I have a question from me now, not one of my official questions. I heard about the project that you worked on to do with the ruins in Meknes, the Roman ruins. And
I've really lost you, Madeline. I'm going to try and log in on another machine and see if it works.
Oh.
Right, I'm going to leave this one
and go on to this one.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes.
Fantastic. I thought it was me. I was asking about the Roman ruins in Meknes, because that's a question from me as an interested party.
So look, we brought Dame Mary Beard out here to Morocco to look at those ruins, and she said they are some of the most amazing ruins she's ever seen. We wanted to bring the volubilis bronzes back to the UK to take them on an exhibition to Cambridge University, which, despite everything that I've said earlier, is an amazing university. Volubilis is absolutely worth going to. I think if I was to recommend one thing, though, it would be to go and get lost in the Medina in Fez. It's the most extraordinary place, and it's it's hundreds of years of history looking down at us from that Medina. It's the most beautiful place. My favorite town in Morocco is Tangiers, but Chefchaouen comes very close to it. I would recommend that you go and climb Mount Toubkal and look down from one side out into the desert, out towards Ouarzazate, and back the other way towards the green fields around Marrakesh. I would recommend that you go to the Noor solar plant near Ouarzazate. I would recommend that you go out into the desert in Zagora and Merzouga. I would recommend that you go up into the Reef Mountains around the Hoceima. I would recommend that you go swimming in the sea off Ras Al Mar in the north. I would recommend that you go to Agadir and Essaouira and get sandblasted by the sand that blows in your face. I'd recommend that you go and have dinner up on one of the ramparts overlooking the sea from Essaouira. I would recommend that you go surfing in Buznica. I would recommend that you do all of these things. And that's what's so great about Morocco. It's not a country. In Argentina, you have lots of these different things without perhaps the history, but it takes 60 hours to drive from one end of Argentina to the other. It doesn't take that long in Morocco. It's all here, and it's all compact, and it's all available. Come and see it. Come and experience it.
Thank you. We've got another question from Brahim, who says, when will the British Embassy suggest an official visit of Her Majesty Elizabeth II to the Moroccan Kingdom?
Before coming out to post, I had the honour of being presented to Her Majesty. And I said to her, it would be wonderful to have you out to Morocco. And she looked me in the eye and she said, do you know how old I am? And I'm not allowed to tell you any more of our conversation because I'm bound by that. But suffice it to say, she has extremely warm memories of her visit here. And she sent her grandson here last year. I would love to see Her Majesty the Queen here. There's nothing that would give me greater pleasure. But I have to be honest, I think maybe it is time for the next generation to take over those duties of travelling. The royal visit here last year was a huge success. It was one of the absolute highlights of my time here in Morocco, not least because we managed to go to see Education for All. We managed to go out of Rabat. We managed to go to near Imlil, to Asni. We managed to see some amazing things. We managed to meet Chef Moha. We managed to meet disabled children who were using horses to reintegrate themselves to find a recovery. It was just a wonderful, wonderful time. And so I believe that, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex having visited, the next question is when the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge will visit. And I would very much hope that that would not be before too long.
Thank you. We have another very nice question. What will you miss most about Morocco now that you're leaving?
I'll miss the weather. So working from home for the last 4 months has been an absolute joy because I've been able to do phone calls and wander around the garden. I've planted in the garden tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers and strawberries and basil plants, and it's been wonderful. But seriously, I will miss the food in Morocco. I will miss being able to just get in the car and go to Marrakesh. I love Marrakesh. It's the most mysterious and magical city. And it's such a privilege to be able to hop in a car and 3.5 hours later, I'm in the shadow of those amazing mountains and I'm delving down into the most amazing magic of the Medina. I'll miss that. There's a magic about Morocco and I will miss that. But I think really the thing I will most miss here is the people, the generosity, the warmth of spirit, the hospitality, the openness with which you've made me and my family feel so welcome here. And that's a rare gift. And so I think that's what we will miss overall. But it's just, we've had the most wonderful time here and we will be really, really sad to leave. And we will always have part of our heart here in Morocco, and we will come back as often as we can.
Thank you. So time for a couple more questions. Have you had the chance to meet the new Moroccan ambassador to the UK?
Thanks, Ashraf. I have met him, but not since he has been nominated. And certainly, if he's listening, it would be really good to see you before you go to the UK. We could possibly just about do a socially distanced lunch here at the residence. It would be my honor to host you. It would be great to hear about your hopes and dreams and to share with you what I think the real potential of this relationship is. The current Moroccan ambassador to the UK is a good friend of mine. Absalam came with his wife and their deputy head of mission for dinner at our house in Hampshire before we came out here. He's done a great job, and I think the appointment of the new man marks a new change in the dynamic of the relationship. I wish him every success, and I hope that he will be able to continue the work that Absalam and I have done to take this relationship forward.
Thank you. We've got quite a long question here. It might obscure our faces, but I'll put it up so you can see all of it and then get rid of it. So one of the agreements between Britain and Turkey is the personal business visa. As an established business in Wales, I have many Moroccans who would like to invest here in the UK, but the requirements are nowhere near the Turkish personal business visa. Would you advocate for a change so that the requirements could match the agreement with Turkey?
Right. I am not going to get dragged into what I think an ideal visa regime should be. This is something the British government is looking at very closely. It has launched this week a new points-based visa system. I would encourage you to look at that. From my perspective, we should do everything we can to encourage business exchange between the UK and Morocco. Whether that means a new visa system or it means more of these types of distance calls, which COVID has proved are perfectly feasible, I don't know. And I'm certainly not going to speculate here on what an ideal visa regime should be. But we should be encouraging, whatever way we can, business exchange between the UK and Morocco, and encouraging British businessmen to see Morocco for the opportunity that it represents, not as something slightly exotic and slightly difficult to understand.
Thank you. On that topic, this person has said, what are great books that you've read about Morocco?
So I've got here some of my favourite books about Morocco. This one, Lords of the Atlas, Gavin Maxwell, is absolutely brilliant. This one is a lovely, lovely book, The Morocco That Was by Walter Harris. This one, Morocco As It Is by Stephen Bonsal. And this one here, Morocco Awakes by Melior. These are some of the books I've read. I would recommend them all. There's also a very good one called White Gold, which is about Moulay Ismail and the slave trade in 1580, 1620, which is a fabulous book. There is a really, really good book which is called The History of Modern Morocco, and I can't remember who wrote it, but I will find it for you, and I will send it to you, or I will put it on my Twitter account. Go to my Twitter account, and I'll put all these up on my Twitter account for you.
Thank you. I am going to buy some of those and have a read. I think we've just about run out of questions. Is there anything that you would like to say before we finish for this evening?
Yeah, so I would just like to sort of say thank you to Morocco, really, for giving us the experience that we've had here, and just share with you one last reflection on bilateral relationships. It is very easy to think of bilateral diplomatic relationships as my relationship with the foreign minister, my relationship with the trade minister, my relationship with whatever minister it might be. And those are really important. And I would like to say thank you to the ministers here for working so closely and so productively and so helpfully with me and making this a much easier process. But the bottom line is I will leave, the minister will leave, and therefore what survives the change of an ambassador, what survives the change of a minister is not actually that personal relationship. It is the cultural relationships between people. It is the understandings between people. It is the confidence between people. It is the removal of the jahliya, the ignorance between people. And that's why, for me, culture and cultural exchange has been so important. And that's why bringing people like Dame Mary Beard here has been so important. It's why bringing the Welsh National Opera here has been so important. It's why bringing the London Community Gospel Choir or wine experts or chefs or academics or sports teams to Morocco has been so important, because it is the building of those personal relationships between individuals and between cultures and between nations that is the fundamental structure around which durable and sustainable bilateral relationships can be built. But I would end where I began. We have had 3 of the most amazing years of our life. We have absolutely enjoyed it. I'm so sad to be leaving Morocco, and I'm doubly sad to be leaving Morocco like this, under the shadow of COVID, where our last 6 months were stolen from us, where we weren't able to do the food trade delegations, the international volleyball, the international entrepreneurs, the last visits around Morocco, the visit that I wanted to do to Figuig. There were so many more things I wanted to do. We would have been sad anyway, leaving Morocco, but I'm doubly sad to leave in COVID. But I'm really delighted that my successor, Simon Martin, is such a great bloke and he's such a great diplomat. And I have every confidence that he will carry on this dynamic and this momentum. And I wish you every success. And I hope that when I come back, I will be welcomed back with open arms.
Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for answering all of our questions so honestly and openly.
A real pleasure. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who took the time to log on and ask questions.